Show with me, Swindon Dobson, and him, Tim Patton. Today we discuss why Mamdani is neither a communist nor a jihadist. Tim.
There has been a lot of overheated reactions toward Mamdani's victory in the mayor race in New York City, especially on the so-called normie right, what I'll call the Babylon B right types, and of course the Zionist neoconservative area, as well as Bill Maher types. Some centrists as well. I can't really be bothered by this guy. I'm not from New York City. I didn't vote in the election. I didn't recommend anyone vote for him. I think voting is kind of a scam anyway. But this guy is just a petite bourgeois, corporate lifestyle liberal par excellence. I mean, he is a cultural Muslim. New York City is full of quote unquote foreigners, air quotes. I mean, and this guy is arguably an olive-skinned model minority par excellence. So many Christian evangelical types who represent the rights that I've described, the Zionist right, the Babylon B right, the normie right, like a particular type of foreigner, aka Israeli, and they have no trouble with them being mayors. But this guy, for some reason, they do. So again, if you want to say no foreigners should be mayor of New York, fine. But that precludes a lot of people currently living in New York City from serving political office anyway. If you go to wealthier universities, and this is his wife, by the way, Mamdani's wife. They're very much of a show couple. She's the typical foreign woman who attends American universities. Her parents were from the elites of Syria. She grew up in one of the Gulf states. Like, this woman, again, is not. They're Mamdani and his wife, in a way, are the most westernized or Americanized possible, arguably, without being, born in the United States. And as far as the socialism is concerned, and this might annoy some, conservatives, my theory of socialism is that it's largely Western grown, especially if you include Marx. If you say Marx is a Westerner, it's especially Western grown, which goes back to my earlier comments about foreigners. Mamdani's socialism, if you trace his intellectual origin, does not come from India, does not come from the Ottoman Empire. It comes out of Kant, Hegel, and various other, Christian heretical type intellectual things. So his other major claim to is socialism, is very westernized. You can criticize that, you can be against that, but that's not out of the blue, so to speak, here in the United States or Western Europe. So when people say socialism comes from somewhere else, no, it doesn't. And by the way, by saying he is westernized, I mean westernized socialist. I mean, in practice, he's just going to do Bismarckian-style social democracy, a la Paul Krugman. A la Dwight D. Eisenhower, a la Richard Nixon. I mean, these guys had high tax rates. These guys had recommended things like grocery stores and other things to be, these things aren't that radical in the Western tradition. Now, I'm not saying this you should be in favor of this, but I think overheated reactions towards Mamdani is just kind of silly. New York has huge subsidies to all sorts of things, so like the Libertarian, sort of like Reason Magazine, neoconservative, outrage out this guy. He's going to bring the People's Republic of New York. He's just insane. It's just insane. And as far as the cultural point, the U.S. and New York is like the ground floor of globalism. The U.S. started out as a WASP project, but it only got big with the inclusion of other groups. If the U.S. remained a mono-ethnic Protestant area, it would have been a really big version of Sweden, but it would have gotten outside of the Northeast and maybe Chicago and Pennsylvania. The South was full of slaves, Catholics, and other groups. That would have been a different country. The Southwest would have been part of Mexico or somewhere else. Texas might have been a different republic. The Northwest, something else. So the United States, and again, I'm not advocating this, but the United States without immigration, outside of WASP immigration, and that goes to my question of who is and isn't a foreigner. By the definition of, if all non-WASPs are foreigners, that means almost everyone in New York is a quote-unquote foreigner in my eyes. If you include it to everyone else, that means the people from Eastern Europe, people from Dubai, and those so forth, if they're Americanized too, why can't they be mayor? And this is my question to like neoconservatives and Babylon B types mainly. That's what I'm directing towards. So Mamdani and his wife, because I think there are a couple, um, um, in political terms, just like Jackie and the Kennedys, for example, and the Obamas. This might make me an advocate of liberal white replacement. I'm not, but I'm just describing the process that is happening. I would say he is as white as Benjamin Netanyahu or Bernie Sanders. He's as much as a foreigner or a local as them, and arguably he's New York par excellence, the New York story par excellence. So unless you're prepared to disbar the Netanyahus and Epsteins and others from the government, then shut up about Mamdani. So that's my cultural point. His Islam seems very lukewarm. I've yet to see any case that he is like some sort of jihadi or is wanting to set up the people's Sharia court. Now again, I'm not in favor of immigration to begin with, but if they're here and they're granted political rights and they win elections, then you should reconsider bombing other countries. You should reconsider economic policies that cause people to move to the United States if you're really concerned about this. And that's directed, again, to the Babylon B types, the Ed Fazer types, and so forth, Ben Shapiro types, and so forth. And as far as New York City, he's becoming mayor of New York City. So if he's going to implement the People's Republic of New York City, Wall Street is there. As a paleo-libertarian, I'm not really the biggest fan of like Wall Street style corporate capitalism, which is heavily subsidized by the Federal Reserve. It's oddly enough probably the biggest welfare whore. If you really want to talk about welfare whore, like that is Wall Street at this point. And it's been that way for a long time, arguably. I mean, this is the difference between like Murray Rothbard style libertarianism and like Ayn Rand, Reason Magazine, Walmartism libertarianism. If if you take Aristotle's views of justice, people get what they deserve. If taxes go up in New York City, so what? I mean, arguably, if you just want to defend these billionaires in New York City, go ahead. I mean, they're just going to move to Miami anyway. And as far as if you look at the billionaires, I mean, I would say many of their industries they live in are deeply corporate capitalist, shady, and they get huge subsidies. So it's like I'm not going to sit here and worry about option traders and various other traders who got bailed out in 2008. Again, if this makes me sound like a socialist, then so be it. I would argue Murray Rothbard, by that definition, then is a socialist. If not caring about the fortunes of people who made their money, basically whoring themselves to the government. I mean, these are the biggest corporate socialists out there, and this is arguably who he's might attack. Now, the odds that Mamdani ends up doing any of this stuff, I would say, are almost zero. I mean, the odds that Mamdani winds up being an empty suit are quite high. What can exactly do as mayor of New York to take on the New York financial industry or the New York Fed or really raise taxes? He operates as one city in one state, part of a larger. Now, New York is important, but it's not that important. And as far as foreign policy is concerned, I can't help but be a bit of an optimism. He is to mention words against certain worth sentiments. Now, again, he probably will just end up being an empty suit. So, if you're the Babylon B types and the neoconservatives shouldn't really be concerned at all. Obama continued the wars. Again, he's just the mayor of New York. He's not the El Presidente. So my general take is not to support him, but also not to care and just to be honest to some extent of what he is and isn't, and just kind of laugh at it and just have some fun and try to look for the, so to speak, silver linings of these things. I think it's funny that this guy is president and mayor, and I think it's funny that some people are so pissed off about him. He just seems to be a model minority. The couple, they're just a bourgeois, petite, foreign couple par excellence. You can be against that if you want, but if you're against that, you're against a lot of the other people that the quote-unquote normie right support. And that's my central point. So again, the case for indifference. Swithin, do you have any take on him? I think it's funny, to be honest. Swithin, what's your take?
I'm not in America, so I didn't really follow it particularly closely. I just heard everyone going, "Oh yes, this socialist candidate." I'm like, yeah, I doubt he's going to be advocating the public ownership of the means of production, and unsurprisingly, he's not. Yes, he wants to be free buses and stuff, but having looked at, I mean, I looked a bit more closely, and yes, he's a bit like hardcore social democracy platform at least. But it's basically Bernie Sanders becoming mayor of New York, which is not a good thing. But it's not Mao being mayor of New York or Stalin. So it is very silly. I mean, your point about him being liberal, I mean, you mentioned Obama. I was going to say, he is basically Obama. He is the off-white sort of social. I mean, Obama wasn't quite as social democratic as Mamdani seems to be. But he ticks very similar boxes to Obama. And yeah, the mass overreaction, I suspect the overreaction to Mamdani is very much fueled by the Zionist quarter. As a note, when you do look at immigration, it does seem to be the case that, well, in the case of Britain and other countries, it seems to be that black immigration and Muslim immigration is the most problematic when it comes to social cohesion. If you look at unemployment rates, crime, etc., they're basically the big two. Now you could say, well, it's cultural from the way of the background, but that's basically what it is. But the sort of idea that we're going to become some Islamic republic, or there's going to be some sort of caliphate, I think is very much pushed by the Zionist bunch, because they want to foster the idea in the West of, oh yes, we need to be this counter jihad party, and who is on the front line of the counter jihad? Israel. So I think very much it's from those quarters, and it's really obvious that Mamdani is not a jihadist. It's absurd to say so. His wife looks like she would blend in like Syrian, like you wouldn't know if you look particularly closely that she was foreign, and she doesn't wear sort of Islamic garb. She's just, as you say, it's the power couple, liberal, upper middle class power couple. It's interesting as well because there has been some infighting I've come across on the left about Mamdani, which is that some of the left saying, "Oh no, he's basically saying, oh, it's okay, he's not a jihad, he's a good Muslim," and then other leftists are like, "You're othering Muslims. You're saying he's a good Muslim. You're not like one of those, actual Muslims. You're like saying that like the actual Muslims are bad." And it's like, and so it's quite amusing that there's been this infighting on the left, being that they're saying it's like a safe Muslim because there's unsafe Muslims, actual sort of conservative Muslims, and they'd be a problem. So it's kind of funny because even on the left they kind of acknowledge that he's kind of, I mean, maybe it's too far to say he's Muslim in name only, but he's sort of as Muslim as Joe Biden is Catholic. Is seemingly what he's going for. And yeah, I mean, the fact that he's New York mayor is it means you can leave, and people were leaving anyway after 2020. So it's not as if he has power over like the entirety of the US or something. So yeah, I mean, Mamdani would be bad, but I really like your points on the subsidies for them. I mean, it's similar to if someone came in saying, "Oh, we want to tax London more," and I'm kind of like, "Well, I don't live in London," but I'm like, "Well, you know what? I don't care for two reasons. One, they're close to the printing press, so they get loads of benefits because they basically print the stuff. And if you look at per capita infrastructure subsidies, London gets the most of anywhere in the country." And it's like, I wonder why it's easy to get to London and nowhere else. So the sort of the the reactive element on sort of like the conservative and libertarian right with this is very silly. Now, the one way you could say it's more so possibly the demographic one. Then I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, you get to the question of what is an American. Kind of tricky to define. Although what I would say is, when it comes to sort of visible integration, the darker your skin, the harder it is to visibly integrate. Is Mamdani on the light enough side to get away with it? Maybe, but maybe not. Because when it comes to, if you look at cohesion, you want to have a sense of who's in the group and who's not in the group. And if you're in a situation such that you can easily be distinguished, then that's going to make you more difficult to integrate, or at least there's going to be less of a shared sense of togetherness. Whereas some of the Eastern Bloc, you could probably get away with that. Now, some of the Eastern Bloc Jews, sometimes, but even them wearing suits and stuff are pretty distinctive. But yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, yeah, I mean, if you're going to go after Mamdani, you're going to have to go after, some of the Jews. If your position is that visible minorities up to a certain level are going to make sort of social cohesion and a sense of togetherness hit a level where it kind of dissipates, then you'd have to be more consistent with that. Which obviously, if the anti sort of jihadist sentiment comes from the Zionists, is not an argument that they're going to want to perpetuate, because that would be a Nazi problem, according to Laura Loomer. So those are my overall initial thoughts really on Mamdani.
Yeah, I'd be completely fine with going to the Babylon Bee or the National Review and just saying, hey, only WASPs who've been here for 10 generations can run for political office. But I think I would probably get banned from every single website if I said that. Now, I'm just saying that hypothetically. But, that's one solution, to keep out the Mamdani. Just make it you have to be here for 100 years or something like that. But again, this is antithetical to liberalism. And I would argue that Mamdani is more liberal than the National Review and other types. So it's and when it comes to immigration, the National Review types are very much opposed to Trump's border wall, at least on paper. Again, if you get in the weeds, if you get in the neoconservative weeds, they'll say both things. But they're not exactly, first, they're not exactly first in line in advocating, border patrol. They're also oftentimes the first ones, the normie rights, to go in, well, the Democrats are the real racists, or whatever, and I think the situation in London is a very similar, or the reason we need to oppose immigration is they don't support gay marriage. I mean, this to me is a canard that's brought out in Europe a lot and in the United States somewhat. And it's I'm a bit of a libertarian to myself, but I'm neither for nor against it. I'm kind of indifferent towards that issue too. It doesn't really bother me either way, I'm always going to kick out of the Chris Catrone, Michelle Foucault, both of which who are gay, who make the point that, one of the reasons why people historically, and again, this is an antithetical position to the normie left as well. One of the reasons people did gay marriage was precisely because it's transgressive. And when you make it quote unquote legal, again, I have no problem with Glenn Greenwald. You also take away some of the appeal of it, which again, this gets into sort of Foucauldian politics, which, as Jürgen Habermas would say, Foucauldian is a young conservative. He's a bit of a, that sense. So again, the reason people oppose immigration, in particular sectors of the normie right that are outraged about this, to me are incoherent. And if you wanted to say New York City is just incoherent mishmash of different peoples and groups, that's fine. I mean, that's my actual position in a way. But then the fact that he's winning, this goes back to my point about if you take the Aristotelian view of justice, people get what they deserve. New York and New Yorkers, get what they deserve in the sense that they aren't a cohesive group. They're a financial city. They're they're like a diverse corporation. And surprise, surprise, certain sectors of the diversity elect the leader they want to give them stuff. And when it comes to socialism, I'm in theory opposed to it. I'm in theory opposed to it, by the way. But like, who's the biggest welfare recipient in the United States? The mega corporations, arms industry, and the financial industry. There, and this is where I think the Keith Prestons and the Glenn Greenwalds types, in the long run, are right, as well as Murray Rothbard, as opposed to people like Ayn Rand. That like, if you look at it's not the Cadillac welfare queen. It's more like, the CEO of Raytheon. That's the bigger issue. And that's a sort of focus on. That's a sort of question of what do you focus on. And as I've gotten older, especially since COVID sort of changed me. Before COVID, I might have been more of a normie, right? But after seeing, Amazon and various other things basically loot the sort of petite bourgeois class through COVID, I just basically realized that, like, the real threat are the high IQ criminals. Those are the real threat, not the low IQ gangs and so forth. They can be managed. And if anything, as people like Lou Rockwell point out, when the mafias were in charge of cities, they arguably were safer anyway than when the sort of neoliberals are in charge. That's one of the paradoxes that oftentimes gets brought up about, like, local order. One of the problems of the sort of neoliberal state war on gangs is it actually makes, forgetting the fact that they kind of made the gangs by having a war on drugs. This goes back in the deep history of prohibition in the United States, as well as elsewhere. So if you look at, like, what do the immigrants of these cities do, and should they be allowed political office? Well, if you take a standard view, which the National Review does, then of course they should be allowed. I mean, of course blacks should be allowed to vote. Of course, the Union won the Civil War. The Confederates are bad, by the way, according to the normie conservatives. So, like, I just view this. I view the reaction to this guy as indicative, excuse me, of their general incoherence regarding both foreign policy as well as domestic policy. Again, I'm going to repeat, I'm opposed to theoretical socialism. I've read Hans Hoppe, but if you read the really hardcore good libertarians, you'll recognize a problem, which is that like so much becomes a kind of reparations problem as well as a degrees problem. And New York City being the financial capital of the United States and to a large extent still the world, like, I just don't think they're, like, the question, like, what do they actually own? What does J.P. Morgan Chase or some of these other large banks, especially since 2008, the Federal Reserve basically just hands them money. Like, it's not exactly true. The liberal economists will say that's not exactly true, but like, we've done some episodes on our Moldbug theory of banking or the Misesian theory of banking. But like, if you look at New York's major industry, that's what it is, and it's servicing that. Yes, there's other things that there too, tourism and so forth, blah blah blah. I agree. But if you look at, like, the breadwinning industries there, that's not what it is. It's like, I'm not against this, but I'm not exactly for this either. That's not pure libertarian capitalism. You shouldn't defend that if you're a genuine paleo-libertarian or libertarian. That's corporate capitalist. Now, this gets into no true Scotsman thing, possibly, but it's like, so it's like, well, if that's where the thing goes, then that's where you have to go. Again, that's my points about the specific policies of socialism. It's like, so what? He wants to have an at-cost grocery store in New York City. Like, U.S. military bases have at-cost grocery stores. You should, the neoconservatives should oppose the U.S. militaries. They should send cutthroat things into the U.S. military bases if you really want to be consistent. And like free buses. Arguably, all infrastructure to some extent is subsidized by the United States government in some sense. Again, this isn't an argument against infrastructure per se. This is just an argument against, well, highways are subsidized. This is a strong towns argument that's made. So it's like, if you could make the say, well, fare collection in New York City, since buses use less of like space and road wear than cars, then arguably you're subsidizing the limousines and Ubers and other things that the elites use at the expense of buses. So actually having more people ride buses is better, if considering the fact that the roads are public property anyway. And that's a very good strong towns Michael Munger style argument that's made. And as far as healthcare is concerned, again, this goes back to Bernie Sanders. I'm not what the U.S. healthcare system is not free market, laissez-faire capitalism. It's this absurd system where the state funds insurance companies to fund regulated doctors. And it's so insane that that's not capitalism. Again, I'm not an advocate of single payer, but as Michael Munger would point out, single payer is probably more efficient than the current existing U.S. system for healthy adult males. Whether it's better for older people and others, I don't know. That's a different question. But for healthy adult males like myself, this system is insane. So many people either are underinsured or don't get insured and just pay for their accidents if they get them. So again, I'm opposed to theoretical socialism. I'm opposed to immigration, which, by the way, the National Review, the neoconservative types, and Babylon B types aren't fully opposed to all those things as properly stated, as properly, thoroughly stated. If you get into a debate with an actual socialist, and you can't just say capitalism is what the U.S. government does, because then you could just argue the U.S. government is socialist too, and this becomes this weird term labyrinth debate. So that's my overview of it. I don't have too much more to say. I just think the reaction is just insane. So then, what are your comments on my subsidies and arguments like that? I assume you're also opposed to socialism.
Yes, of course. The thing of socialism, I have a Chinese tutee, and I made a comment about, China is socialism with Chinese characteristics, and he responded that the current American economic system should be described as socialism with American characteristics, which I thought was a good retort with the current position. So I think there's sort of two possible explanations, at least, well, apart from the counter-jihad one. For why Mamdani has caused so much of a kerfuffle. Firstly is just status quo bias. He's doing something different, and it's stuff that we don't like, therefore we get upset. Okay, fine. Now, the thing is, why does everyone get upset? Because reflexively, a lot of people kind of think that the status quo is good and is all-American and is sort of pro-capitalist. And which, as you accurately identified, it clearly isn't. And then also, as you point out, CEO of Raytheon and the defense contractors are probably the bigger problem, and the sort of corporate military industrial complex plus the financial complex are the two biggest problems. So if you're going to go for, we're going to subsidize buses, then make them free. I'm like, so what? It seems to lack a strategic goal. But to be honest, I'm not entirely. In defense of the reactions to some extent, figuring out what the best strategy is actually really hard. It's relatively straightforward to come up with an ideal society. I say relatively, and then if you had basically you were all powerful and you could give resources back to people who ought to have them based on what was just property acquisition, that's pretty straightforward. What isn't straightforward, though, is how do we act today to help further that goal, assuming that's the goal we want to get to, and that's kind of difficult. And where you should focus and where you shouldn't focus. And as I say, Mamdani says he'll do all this stuff. He probably won't. He'll do some of it, but so what? So it's when people say, "Oh no, the Labour are going to try and nationalise the railways in England." It's like the railways are private. It's like, no, they're not. They're a monstrous public-private partnership where the state owns the tracks. There's legal separation between the owners of the stations, and the different private operators have to bid on a contract that the government has to sign off that they can have for a time in this period, and then bid on it again. I'm like, that's not a private system. You've nationalised. I don't care. So I severely doubt, for instance, in the buses in New York City, any bus company can run whatever routes he wants and pick whoever he wants up. Because all the time you want to get a bus license, you've got to do what the government says are the routes. Because if you did that, the argument would go, oh, well, you wouldn't have a comprehensive system. And the little old lady who lives in the middle of nowhere wouldn't be able to get the bus. Why? Because there's no point. She should get a car or a taxi. But no, it's sorry. So a lot of this thing is reflexive reaction, just simply doesn't take into account at all what the current regulatory system is. And actually, even though it's private, it's not. I mean, it's like saying, it's like saying these military contractors are private. No, they're not. Their customers are exclusively governments. They're just an arm of the government. It's like Serco. Serco in England do loads of stuff for the government. They're the ones who guarantee payment and stuff for when the housing asylum seekers in the properties, and pay landlords. So landlords basically get easy, cheap money, and they know Serco is going to pay. They're not going to be like some random tenant who's going to be a bit dodgy paying his rent. So I originally say it's difficult strategy, but if you just open your eyes to the amount of regulation and intervention exists currently, the things that are nominally private are far from what you would call a clean private operation. I mean, yes, you did have some of those. So my understanding, for instance, when British Sugar was privatized and became Silver Spoon, basically just became a sugar company and competed with others. And I don't believe there was any additional regulation. But there's so many, especially regarding infrastructure, are like that. So, yeah, I think this is where the radical libertarian positions are good, because they actually point out what the government has done already to create the system you already have. And so it was never pure to begin with. Now, is this a good way of getting to the good position? Probably not. But is it something I'm going to get really upset about? No. So, yeah, that would be my overall and concluding thoughts. Now, just like to thank everyone for listening. If you'd like this podcast, please share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to us on Podbean and on YouTube. The more subscribers we get, the higher we get in the search rankings, and the more people can access this material. And if you'd like to contact the show for any reason at all, please contact us at mindcrimelibертyshow@gmail.com. That's mindcrimelibертyshow@gmail.com.